The White House and Kremlin announced just moments ago that President Trump and the Russian leader Vladimir Putin will meet on July 16th in Helsinki. The announcement came just minutes after the president wrote this: Russia continues to say they had nothing to do with meddling in our election. Joining us now is Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz. He serves on the Judiciary Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us. What message does that send to Vladimir Putin minutes before announcing a key summit between the two leaders? Russia continues to say they had nothing to do with meddling in our election.
I have no idea, but I'm going to stop second-guessing President Trump's Twitter foreign policy and Twitter diplomacy. It seems to have moved us in the right direction in North Korea, and if it can improve our relationship with Russia, that's good.
I'm not asking you to second-guess it. And you sit on the Armed Services Committee, and obviously you have a keen interest in U.S.-Russian relations. You know the assessment from the U.S. intelligence agencies that Russia meddled in the U.S. election. You know the indictments. What did you just say?
Russia did meddle in our elections. Russia meddles in elections all over the world. That is not something that is factually in dispute.
Then why am I reading this from the President of the United States? Russia continues to say they had nothing to do with meddling in our election. You just said very clearly they did. That is a factual statement.
That is a factual statement. Russia does continue to say that. I believe they continue to lie, and I think that that's part of the game that the president plays with foreign leaders. There's a little bit of yin and a little bit of yang. He brings them fire and ice.
Have you ever heard the president say that Vladimir Putin is lying when he suggests that Russia did not meddle in the election?
Well, I know that this president has been very tough on Russia. I'm not going to share with you my personal conversations about his assessment of Vladimir Putin's veracity, but Vladimir Putin is a former KGB agent. Of course he lies, and of course Russia meddles. They do it in Latin America, they do it in the Balkans, they do it in Eastern Europe. At times they buy off religious leaders. This is part of a global malign influence campaign that Russia engages in.
You were just roughly 6 billion times tougher on Vladimir Putin in Russian meddling than President Trump has ever been, right? And President Trump is the one who will be sitting down face-to-face with Vladimir Putin 1 month from now. Do you hope he says to Vladimir Putin, I don't believe you when you say Russia did not meddle in the U.S. election?
I think it's far less important, the posture of who believes who and the puffing. It's far more significant if we're able to get better outcomes around the world, if we're able to establish more security in Syria, for example, so that there's not a refugee crisis that imperils Europe. I think that, there are security agreements and arrangements we can make to box in North Korea to denuclearization. So I'm more interested in those outcomes than in whether or not the president wants to sit there and call Vladimir Putin a liar.
Those would be great outcomes.
We all know he's a liar. I think the president knows Vladimir Putin's a liar.
I wouldn't know how you would know that, because I've never heard the president say that. Unless it's come up in a private discussion that the two of you have had, there's no indication the president thinks that. Would you agree?
I think that everybody knows it. The question is, what's the right avenue of diplomacy, right?
I just want to know, just on that one point, again, on that one point, because the president has never said it publicly. Do you have reason to believe, because of your private conversations, the president says that? Specifically,
well, I'm not going to get into my private conversations with the president, but I think all Americans know Vladimir Putin lies. He's a former KGB agent. That's what they do.
And I agree with you on what could be positive outcomes in Syria, in Ukraine, on trade with Russia. There are very serious issues there. Would you also agree that another positive outcome from the discussions with Russia would be to stop them from meddling in U.S. elections?
Of course. I think it would be great if we could get them to stop meddling in all elections. They're trying to attack democracy as an institution, and they're trying to demonstrate to fragile regimes all over the globe that their autocratic style is better than our democratic style. And frankly, we need to get on them about that, and we need to have both offensive and defensive systems in place to be able to deal with this as a global strategy that Russia is deploying.
That's a great point. Get on the Russians. You may want to, and far be it for me to give you advice, get on the president to get on them as well. I do want to ask you about something you're uniquely positioned to tell us about, which is this 11-hour testimony from Peter Strzok yesterday before the House Oversight and Judiciary Committees. First of all, I wish it were open. I wish the public had a chance to see it. Do you agree?
Totally. Yeah, I've been very critical of the decision to have any closed-door interviews or depositions. This is so important to the American people and to the country that we have, and I think we should do it in the open. I will say that my impression after hearing Peter Strzok's side of the story is that Bob Mueller was just categorically uncurious about the text messages that Peter Strzok and Lisa Page were to each other. You would think that when Bob Mueller found those text messages, he would be asking all kind of questions about whether or not bias impacted the collection of evidence or investigative decisions. And I was shocked at the lack of curiosity from Bob Mueller. It was almost as if he did not want to know the answers to those questions.
Because it was not public, we could not see for ourselves how Peter Strzok answered that. So we only have your word on that. Manu Raju's talked to other sources, and I believe they were Republican sources, who also said that Strzok told you all that Mueller did not ask a lot of questions about the texts after learning about them. What he did do was fire Peter Strzok right away. Wasn't that the appropriate action?
It wasn't the only appropriate action, because we have to find out whether or not Peter Strzok tainted the investigation with the manipulation of evidence or reports.
Isn't that the Inspector General's job, and isn't the Inspector General doing that?
Oh, no. That is not exclusively the purview of the Inspector General. Of course, we will be receiving an Inspector General report on that. When I asked the Inspector General how all the very same people who worked on the Hillary Clinton investigation, who then opened up on Trump-Russia, ended up on the Special Counsel's investigation, the Inspector General admitted that that was incredibly curious and that he had no reasonable explanation for why you would have that type of a staffing decision. And so I think we'll see that report. But of course, Bob Mueller, independent of the Inspector General, has an obligation to make sure that the evidence he's developing is not tainted by bias, and that his lead investigator wasn't making administrative decisions based on bias, and he didn't want to know the answer to those questions.
He fired him. I think you could interpret that, but you could interpret that.
Strzok didn't work before he was fired,
and I'm saying he absolutely did, Congressman. And again, I'll wait to see an Inspector General report, and I would hope that we get a public hearing so we can hear how Peter Strzok answers this as well. But another way to look at it is that Robert Mueller didn't care what the explanation was, because he just didn't want the guy working there anymore, because the explanation wouldn't matter in his determination to fire him. Just the knowledge that he was sending those texts was enough for Mueller to want him out. But
So hold on, John. If a mechanic was working on your car and then you found out he was not a mechanic, he was just a homeless person, before you would fire him, you would probably say, yo, homeless guy, what did you do under the hood to my car, before you would move on?
So Peter Strzok is neither a mechanic nor a homeless person. He's someone who had a long career.
No, but he was a guy that was infected by bias.
He is someone who had a long career.
He thought Hillary Clinton should win $100 million to nothing while he was investigating her.
As an investigator, in all we know so far, and again, I, along with you, want to wait for this Inspector General report, because there were many revelations there. He says that there was no evidence that bias played a role in the determinations in the Clinton investigation. We're waiting to see if he makes that determination in the Russia investigation as well. We're out of time. I do want to invite you back to talk more about that after the public hearing. You and I both agree. We want to see the public hearing then. Let's talk when you and I both have the same perspective on what's being said. Thanks.
I'm game.